Well, hello, my name is Megan. Long and the short with everything that follows my name, I'm a dietitian. I work at Duke. So today, as I was working towards this presentation, I thought about what research do we have about diet, nutrition, liver disease, all that good stuff. And then I thought, well, what do you guys really want to know? So today I kind of structured it in multiple different facets that kind of meets from a liver disease standpoint, and then kind of the here, and then possibly later as well. So if you kind of lost in my presentation, just to kind of tell you, I want to take it from your guys' perspective to meet your needs. All righty. Hopefully that goes forward. All righty, I'm new to this. All right, so objectives here. So we are going to look at the long-term nutrition goals. We're going to discuss some deficiencies that you may have with your disease, and then also talking about potentially PBC and cirrhosis combinations, or just touching on that and what that may look like. Alrighty, so here we have the liver. You guys are all very familiar with that, with all the presentations we've had today. We're going to start on the left side of the screen here in the blue side. So as we know, with different stages of PBC, there is going to be varying degree of scarring in the liver, correct? Now, with that being said, as time kind of progresses and there is more inflammation in the liver moving towards fibrosis and potentially eventually cirrhosis, that can change the nutrition profile. So it's not really one size fits all. Each of you can, be at a different stage of this. So of course, take everything I kind of say with a grain of salt in terms to yourself, okay? Most important. So what's most important here, like I said, the blue box, the light blue box, and up to that green box in the middle there. So really, when we're not having cirrhosis, there is not much nutritional change from that standpoint, okay? What we want to do at these stages is really protecting the liver, so not causing any additional harm to the liver, additional scarring, things of that nature that we want to be careful and protective of that liver. So the idea here, what I'm going to go into next, is how do we not cause any additional harm to the liver. So first here, if any of you guys have ever heard of something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, this is a leading cause of liver disease that's been increasing over the years. And this is one thing that with diet, exercise, lifestyle choices, we really do have control over. So to prevent any further damage, that is one thing with the disease itself, separate, that we can really control. So I'm going to go over some of those factors, and maybe these are some take-home things that you guys, if you're open to the idea, want to start working on. Alrighty. So first and foremost, okay, we're going to draw our eye down to the bottom of the screen here, and we have this scale. Okay, it is called a hunger scale. Now, y'all can imagine, pick where you're at on this scale. Okay, and just think about that. And think about when you had breakfast this morning, where were you on that scale? Were you absolutely starving? Were you really overly full? Kind of where do you lay throughout the day? Why do I think this scale is so important? So in that middle green section, we got 4, 5, and 6 there. This is really where primarily we should live from a hunger standpoint on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Generally speaking, we want to be not eating to the point where we are at 10, where we are Thanksgiving full, where we are knocked out on the couch, can't have another drink or bite to eat. That's where we want to really try to avoid. We also don't want to go to the point where we are so ravenous. We get home and we just want to eat the entire kitchen. I'm sure we can all relate to that. Or you go out and, go to a family member's house or errands or something, and you're like, oh my gosh, the whole day's gone by, I haven't eaten. I'm going to eat one meal and it's going to be the biggest meal ever. These are the types of things, as a dietitian, that I want to encourage you guys, if you feel like, oh yeah, I do that, think about how to make some changes to adjust for that. And why this is. So what's so bad about these extremes, the, feeling completely empty and feeling completely full? These are the times where we may not necessarily make the best dietary choices, where we see that fast food restaurant and you're, yeah, well, we don't have time to cook tonight, so that seems like an easy option. We've all been there. Or potentially, you're running around, you just don't have the opportunity to make a meal, or whatever it may be. A lot of the times we have to think about, as a clinician, as someone who works, with patients, I understand you guys have lives too. It's not just all about your medical care. And that's one thing that I really try to incorporate when I'm, speaking and understand patients. I know you have other things going on, and food is not the first thing that people wake up and think about. That's what dietitians do, but you guys generally probably don't do that. So the idea here is really just thinking about if you could walk away with one thing today is trying to work on not allowing yourselves to get to those extremes. So like I was saying, you may not make the best choices at those exact times. And now we're going to go into what are these principles that I'm talking about in just a moment. So the other thing is moderation, and the other thing is variety. Okay. Now, it's very important. Moderation, everyone laughs at when a dietitian says that. I know. But it's really important to, give yourself the leniency. You're not always going to be perfect. And the variation piece we're going to get into a moment, but to include a well-balanced diet, it's really important to be hitting all those food groups and really prioritizing things that are going to matter most for you. And the other thing is portion control. Now, going back to the NAFLD, like I mentioned in the beginning here, over time, our portions have changed. 25 years ago, 50 years ago, things get bigger and bigger and bigger. We all know this. But things where you can make immediate changes to is even changing, the portions at home, plate sizes, bowl sizes, dish sizes. As you guys had a wonderful presentation before on your quality of life, I always tell my patients and individuals that their significant others, their support system around them, all of those factors we don't necessarily account for, 100% affect your nutrition and how you're going to eat, what you're going to eat, what's available to you, what money you have to spend on food, all of those things. So when it comes to portion control, I do encourage you to kind of be mindful of that if you feel like, yeah, there's areas I'm potentially overeating in, okay? So biggest thing with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is a healthy weight. So if you can take away anything from all of this is really working to maintain a healthy weight for yourself. And of course, like our radiologist presented, they can assess, fat in the liver and things of that nature when they do all of your scans. A little outside of my knowledge there, but I will say is the biggest thing is working towards that healthier diet. So we're going to get into that next here. Alrighty, so improving some of those dietary habits that you may be open to, or maybe you're sitting there thinking, I'm not feeling it quite yet. I'm not quite there. So a couple things is just think about a balanced diet. We think about, if you want to break it down simply, you think about color, you think about smaller meals more frequently throughout the day. Generally trying to follow a lower sodium diet. But you may be wondering, well, I don't have any complications. Why do I need to worry about that sodium component? Now, a lot of patients, when we're working towards a lower sodium diet, we find that higher sodium foods are often associated with higher calorie options too. So we'll go back to my fast food example I gave there for a second. We'll, go with, Bojangles or Chick-fil-A or whatever. These higher sodium options, the preparation style often, can be fried or it's pre-prepared or processed, and that in itself can often cause more calories to be present there, okay? So in general, and I'm going to get into the low sodium portion of this in just a moment, but that is one area that if you just worked on that top bullet alone, you can potentially see some weight loss associated with that, just in that one category alone. And today I'm going to really be focusing on what changes you guys can make to take home, and that could be one maybe you decide you want to start with. Now, added sugar. This is one of my favorites because unfortunately added sugars are everywhere in our diet. And until we start looking at it, a lot of us are not necessarily aware of how much sugar is added into our foods and what form that looks like in our foods. So for example, we think about condiments. we think about bread. I mean, you think about the general grocery aisles of the grocery store, there's going to be a lot of added sugars and things. And this can be another way. Why do we care about sugar so much? Calories, right? So if we're really trying to protect that liver and trying to have less, that's going to be one really important thing that you can do. Now, the next bullet here is the 5 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. This very equally correlates with that low sodium diet. So if you feel like, well, I don't really get the whole low sodium thing, but I feel like I can realistically eat that many fruits and vegetables, that would be a great starting point, because many of us don't. You know, even if you just wrote down in the last couple days how many fruits and vegetables you eat, it takes an effort and a purpose to really try to do that. So that can just be an easy way that can often correct sugar and sodium just by that small step alone. Now, the other thing too is increasing hydrating fluids. So again, thinking about staying well hydrated throughout the day. You got your cup there. I like that sparkly cup you're drinking. And when I say hydrating fluids, I mean anything that does not have caffeine in it. Okay, so if you're thinking like tea, you know, a lot of my southern patients love their tea, and I get it. But I will say, unless it's decaffeinated, that doesn't count as hydrating from my standpoint. Also, we want it to be a calorie-free option too. So, you know, instead of our sodas, and juices and things of that nature, I definitely would say try to decrease them. If you feel like, yeah, I'm drinking a bunch, try to work on decreasing it. And again, any betterment of change is what you want to work towards. You're not just going to go from drinking, you know, 3 cans of soda a day to none. Well, that's not going to be realistic, okay? The other thing is exercise. So just like our quality of life presentation, this is an important thing overall. Many of us do not get adequate exercise. It's not easy to always incorporate it. Life generally gets in the way. So I encourage patients, you know, I know that the fatigue definitely sets in, but oftentimes with working with many patients is that, you know, they feel better once they kind of get in the groove. And it can just be small, you know, it can be, you know, to the end of the block and back. And if you can slowly start to incorporate it on a day-to-day, that's really what we're going for there. So it doesn't mean, yeah, look at the people in the picture, they're running a marathon, great for them. No, that's not probably realistic for you. But, you know, maybe it's just doing a gentle stretching class or a yoga class, or, you know, doing something with your partner or a friend. Support with exercise is huge. I find patients are much more compliant when they have that support. Also, it can become a social thing too. So if you can find in your own life what looks best to you in terms of, yeah, I think I can probably actually do that. And maybe it's just 1 day a week. Do it. You know, 1 day is better than no days. And again, always be patient with your body. If you're feeling really crummy that day, okay, yeah, take a break. It's totally fine. Life goes on. But I would say is trying to really sign yourself up for some time. You know, so a lot of times we'll say, yeah, I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. We all can say that, yeah, I get to that later. And it doesn't. Later never comes. You're tired, you lay on the couch, and that's the end of that. So I would say with regular exercise, really try to build that into your day. Sign yourself up for time for you. All right, put it in. Yeah, I'm going to commit to that. Oftentimes, you know, different classes or things of that nature, like I said, doing it with someone else can also commit their time and your time. All righty. So I told you I was going to get to sodium. So for those of you who are not, you know, don't know too much about sodium, I'm just going to start right here. So anyone here love these Jimmy Deans or bacon? I had tried to pick things that everyone loves. So on the left here, we're going to look at the Jimmy Deans. And I looked up the labels and the portion size and put that at the bottom for us. And it says 2 patties is 290 milligrams of sodium. Yeah. So, and here's the thing is that's only 2 little patties. They're not that big, right? We can all think of probably how big they are. They might even be smaller when you take them out of the box, right? Our total for the day, that is a healthy, just low sodium diet, whether you have ascites or not, this is a healthy diet for people. And, you know, most Americans are eating 4, 5, potentially even more, depending on how much you eat out, 1,000 milligrams of sodium a day. The recommendation is 2,000 a day. This is actually hard to follow, okay? So what I wrote at the top here is what is considered a low sodium food is less than 200 milligrams per serving. Now, why? So without having to send you home and start adding numbers up and counting things and being precise about what you're doing, you could look at a popcorn or some bread or your favorite chocolate, whatever it happens to be. And if those things are generally less than 200 milligrams of sodium a day, say that's a good choice to make from a sodium standpoint, because you don't have to add those things up. So assuming you eat, more or less about 10 different foods throughout the day, because of course you're incorporating some fruits and vegetables hopefully in there that are free from a sodium standpoint. So that's going to give you the bulk of your nutrition there. So that's why, I tell my patients, I practice what I preach, okay? So I don't just sit here and say, I'm just going to not worry about the sodium. This is not an easy thing to do, and to help, everyone as an educator, I try to do this as well. Now I'm going to draw your attention to the right side of the screen here. This bacon, right? We all love bacon, maybe, I don't know, take it or leave it. But bacon is a popular one in terms of, can I have it, can I not have it? Bacon is actually a less, in terms of the one I put on the screen here, it says at the top, uncured, dry rub, sliced bacon. So when you think about sodium, words such as uncured or nitrate-free. Nitrates are preservatives that they inject into foods that are sodium-based, essentially. And you're going to not be having those in the food. So that automatically is going to make the sodium less. So this option, and I'm not going to stand here and say never eat bacon again. No, you can have it, but within reason. So 2 slices here is 220 milligrams of sodium. So if you're, home on a Sunday and you want to cook a nice breakfast, this would definitely be, in my opinion, a better option than choosing a much higher sodium option of the Jimmy Dean patties. Alrighty, so hopefully you learned something there. Again, just general takeaways of sodium, that's very important. Alrighty, so the other thing when it comes to sodium is choosing sodium-free seasonings. So these are going to be things that do not contain salt. Now, if you are to imagine your pantry at home where you keep your seasonings, unless everything in there is a spice or herb, there's probably some sodium in there. If you have any type of salt, that's got sodium. A quarter teaspoon of sodium has 500 milligrams. 1/4 teaspoon, so about the thumb size of your nail, is 500 milligrams of sodium. So 1 teaspoon is your entire day's worth of sodium. So if you're a regular salt user, again, we're thinking about protection, health protection, protecting the liver, protecting the blood pressure, all of these things that we want to be protective of. Sodium is an important one. So I encourage you to use herbs and spices, pretty much anything that does not contain salt. That's the biggest thing here. And again, I already kind of mentioned the nitrates and preservatives, but the biggest thing is you can kind of reduce that down. Again, this will not happen overnight. This is not easy to make adjustments with, but the more that you try to be mindful of it is important. The other thing here I will say is if you find yourself to be a regular person who enjoys to go out to eat or stop at the drive-thru or do takeout, think about that, because generally you never know what they're putting in your foods. So that's the biggest thing, is you don't know how that chicken breast is coming from that restaurant or that burger or that bacon and cheese that's on that burger or whatever it is. You just don't know. So it's really important to think about, I'm not saying take away the component of eating out, but definitely be mindful of it. Alrighty, so I do encourage you, if you have a dietitian that you can work with or talk to, with your following physician, they're probably going to be a great resource to help you kind of get you started. But if you feel super inspired after today, even tracking devices. We have plenty of free apps that you can use and start with. And I recommend just start with one single day. Look at what you actually eat in a day. And then say, okay, can I make a change? Well, first, am I open to making a change? First, that's got to be first. And second, about what type of change would I want to make if that was? But really seeing what you eat in a standard day can be really eye-opening. And sometimes, if you were to sit with me right now and do a diet recall, that's only one particular moment. That's not inclusive of everything. So this can really allow you to kind of reflect on it and make additional changes. But there's, MyFitnessPal is one I'm sure you guys have heard of. There's another one called Chronometer, which I really like too. But it gives you all the nutrition breakdown of what you're eating and maybe areas where you're like, oh, I didn't realize I was, kind of not eating as much protein as I want, or, oh, maybe I'm looking to lose weight and I want to cut back on carbs a little bit more and push protein in terms of focusing on weight reduction. All different things. Of course, I would recommend speaking with a dietitian if you feel kind of lost in the mumbo jumbo of all of that. But these are definitely tools that if you bring this to someone, they can give you, recommendations from that standpoint. But definitely feel supported with anyone locally in your community that you could work with, because I would recommend a clinical dietitian just because of the disease. I think it's very important to have someone who's knowledgeable, but you definitely can also find someone in your community if you're like, I aspire to lose weight or whatever that happens to be. Alrighty, so we mentioned coffee. So let me get a hand raise here. Who loves coffee? Yeah, looks like a good pit of the room. Me too. I have had too much coffee today, I will admit, but coffee is actually known, if you guys didn't already know, coffee is known to help with decreasing inflammation in the liver. So if your hepatologist has ever told you, go drink coffee, continue on. The one thing I will say about this is they do recommend, in terms of the research and literature that is out there, it is black coffee. It is not coffee with milk, and it is not coffee with sugar. So with that being said, think about change over time. If you're like, I'm a milk and cream gal and I just can't get rid of it, say you use a tablespoon of milk and a tablespoon of sugar, for instance, think about trying to wean yourself down, stepwise. Try to do a little bit less each time. And yeah, it might take you a couple months to kind of get there, or maybe you just land where you only have a teaspoon of milk with a cup of coffee or whatever it is. It's still less, and you're still getting closer to this. So I encourage you. I'm not generally one who touches my patient's coffee because I understand it's a very personal thing. But from a liver disease standpoint, I will say, if you do like black coffee, continue on, or maybe you just do it a different way. Maybe you do black coffee with some natural vanilla or something like that, so you can still give it some flavor, or just kind of getting creative with it. That's what nutrition's all about. Alrighty, so the studies do encourage patients in terms of drinking 2 to 3 cups of black coffee a day. So if you feel like you can get there, I'd go for it. But like I said, going back to the hydration standpoint, always keeping your hydrating and dehydrating fluids equal throughout the day keeps you well hydrated. Okay, also can help with fatigue too if that's on your radar. Alrighty. So we're going to kind of break into the nutrition side of things here. So I'm sure you guys all know that there can be some deficiencies with PBC, right? So we know that there can be some issues with fat, and that's patient-to-patient based. So I'm going to touch upon that a little bit there. And then also our vitamins, our fat-soluble vitamins, and then the importance of calcium. Alrighty. So in terms of fats, we have gotten lots of nice diagrams of this lovely organ here for us. And I'm going to focus on the importance of bile, okay? So we know that with PBC, those bile ducts are not going to be working as well. And so we're going to be getting more accumulation of that bile. Now you might be thinking, why do we care so much about that bile? And that bile really is important for fat. Okay, it's going to help break down fat that we're eating. So if that fat is not being broken down well, that can cause issues on the back end in terms of having like greasy stools or things like that. Now, not every patient is going to have this. This is very specific to each individual. The other thing to recognize too is sometimes there can be your pancreas can be involved. You can see it there in the little yellow under. There can be some the pancreas not working well and secreting the enzymes that it needs for digestion, so that can cause an issue too. But I'm sure you guys will know individually if that is your case. But I do encourage patients, the symptoms here that I noted here at the bottom, things like overall really fatigue, weakness, diarrhea, loose stools, weight loss. These are things clinically that you may see home at first before your doctor necessarily sees them. So always pay attention to this. Alrighty, now the important thing here for fat is when it comes to fat is for patients who are not able to break down that fat is an average patient will lose about 3 grams of fat in their stool. But for a PBC patient is you can lose up to 10 grams of fat in your stool. So you may be thinking, that's kind of gross. I don't want to think about my poop. I'm a dietitian who talks about poop all day. That's my job. But what I will say is from a fat standpoint is sometimes patients have to be put on a lower fat diet. But sometimes your metabolic needs, meaning that you're burning more calories than you can kind of keep up with. So when it comes to fat, we think about the different types of fat. All right, so we've all heard about saturated fats, right? These are things like butter, okay, lard, things that are solid at room temperature. Then we think about more of our unsaturated. These are the hot ones, right? We think about our oils, our olive oil, canola oils, things there. We also think about our trans fats. Those have kind of moved away over time, but they're still lingering around. But these are things we think about more like frying, things of that nature. And trans fats have kind of moved out of foods, kind of. But at the same time, they can still kind of hang around too. Now, what I have written on the screen here is these medium chain triglyceride fats. These are important because I have worked with many patients in the clinical setting where they need to work on gaining weight, but they have difficulty tolerating fats. So how do we get them at that middle point? These medium chain triglycerides, are great in the fact that they do not need that bile to digest. All right. So if you're in that situation, think about what did that dietitian say that I need to kind of pay attention to. Now, if you're not having issues with steatorrhea, that fat in that stool, or inability to absorb what you're taking in, then there's no need to change. But again, this is someone in this room could be going through this. So again, there is something called MCT oils, these medium chain, and they actually, you can buy them at the store and take them, incorporate them, again, to help with weight gain if that's an issue that you're having clinically. Coconut oil is another one, but generally I wouldn't recommend this because this is considered a saturated fat. So again, we think from that perspective, from that prevention standpoint, I wouldn't just recommend for everyone to go home and start using coconut oil all the time. Please stick to your unsaturated fats. Alrighty, so now, I have seen in my time many patients who have had different types of vitamin deficiencies, mineral deficiencies. So what I recommend to all of you is to work with your doctor and make sure that they are regularly checking specifically your fat-soluble vitamins, okay? Vitamin A, D, E, and K. These are the ones we care about most. Now, you may think, this doesn't really apply to me, but until it does, then you'll say, oh yeah, I'm starting to have night blindness. Vitamin A, this is where this comes into play. Because we're not able to break these down and absorb them, oftentimes, we can work on incorporating them from a dietary standpoint. With many of the foods that are listed here, fortified items are going to be the biggest one in terms of vitamin A, and animal products. But I do encourage that if your levels are low enough once they are tested to talk to a doctor, talk to your dietitian that can recommend the correct amount for you. I don't recommend just going to the store and buying all of these things because they all have different doses and patients get confused and things of that nature. So definitely check before you just start taking things. But if you are having these symptoms clinically, definitely bring them up. The biggest one that I have seen is definitely changes in vision. I had a patient, she came in and told me that she no longer could see at night. We found she had a vitamin A deficiency with that. So definitely pay attention if you're having changes in your skin and your eye dryness. That's another one patients get. So that is vitamin A for us there. We all think of carrots, so I had to put those up there for us. All righty, vitamin D, the sunshine. All right, so important here is we know based on literature that PBC patients are going to have lower amounts of vitamin D. But it is really important that we are checking those vitamin D levels because it can be helpful in decreasing the amount of fibrosis with the proper amounts of vitamin D. So again, I don't recommend for patients just to start taking random amounts of vitamin D. Please have that checked before you make changes. And I do recommend if you go to the store, you would be looking at vitamin D, and there's lots of different doses. There's vitamin D, there's vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. Well, specifically for you, I want to make sure you're choosing the vitamin D3 as the activated form, okay? And, you know, in your foods, you can definitely get them in things like, you know, we think about people eating bones, right? That's always the random one. People are like, why do you eat bones? Or you think about that orange juice that has vitamin D added to it, or, you know, using, you know, protective, you know, sunscreen and going outside and things of that nature to get a little bit of vitamin D. Those are all important things, but sometimes just because of the absorption, you may not be able to get enough from your food. So no matter how varied and moderated your diet is, it's not going to be able to meet your needs necessarily. So just be aware of it. Don't feel like you're doing something wrong because it's low. Now, when we come to vitamin E here, this is going to be specifically those healthier sources of fats that I had already went over. That's really going to be helping us. And again, supplementation can be important here, but I do recommend, you know, thinking about things like whole grains if you don't already eat those. If you don't incorporate nuts regularly, almonds, cashews, you know, peanuts, whatever your preference is, thinking about eating those. Thinking about eating more seeds, for example, you know, if that is, it could be any type. It could be like a chia seed. It could be pumpkin seeds. It can be anything that you want to incorporate in. And if you're sitting here thinking, I don't know about that, go back to where we started in this presentation. Think about change, right? Think about maybe just adding one food in that you're not already doing to help the betterment of your health. And vitamin K. Now, from working so long in the clinical setting, I wanted to put this up here because I didn't want to exclude vitamin K because it absolutely is fat soluble, but definitely talk to your physician because if you have any type of clotting disorder, things, that can definitely get in the way. So I'm not going to say, again, don't go starting vitamin K. But generally eating a wide variety of different types of greens and things of that nature can definitely be beneficial from a vitamin K standpoint. Alrighty, so the one really important thing here is calcium. So in terms of calcium, I talked about vitamin D and talked about calcium. So they are friends. They always need to be there together at all points in times. So we know that you're going to unfortunately be at risk of developing low bone mass and osteoporosis. So one thing that you can really do, and I know with working for patients for so long, is most patients, most Americans across the board do not get enough calcium. So do not be afraid if you're sitting here thinking, I don't like milk, I don't like yogurt, I'm not going to do that, I don't care what she says. Think about a supplement, okay? It's especially with knowing that you're at higher risk, that's very important. And thinking about, talking to your doctor or dietitian to have them add that in and where it's going to be best. Are there any interaction with your medications? There can be some binding capacity that you have to be careful of. So always get someone else's opinion, but definitely I would say is most of us should be getting about 1,500 milligrams of calcium a day. The general American, generally for Americans over the age of 50, it's 1,200 to 1,500. But sometimes if there's other underlying conditions, it can potentially be higher. So again, just kind of that's just generally speaking. So definitely having regular bone density scans is very important. Going back to that exercise component, if you're not doing regular exercise, think about your bones. They need that exercise, okay? They need to be used. They need to be used to stay strong because bones can get porous over time. And I really recommend, maybe there's even like a lightweight strength training program or something at a local gym you could get involved in, or bands, or, even using, for anyone who has like an Apple Watch or something, those different apps that you can do at home. Those are any ways that we can use those muscles, help strengthen those bones as well. So that is very important. Again, just don't think of it as a chore. Think of it as prevention, okay? Now, the other thing, too, is thinking about fortified products. So if you like, for example, milk, you can get, versions that are fortified or whatever it happens to be. That is an option that helps. But again, the biggest thing with calcium that I want you to take away is you can only absorb a certain amount. So if you go drink a glass of milk for breakfast and then follow it with a yogurt, and then you have a calcium supplement, there's way too much calcium in that meal that you actually can't absorb all of it. So calcium supplements are made to be about 500 milligrams a piece. And if your doctor ever recommends for you to have 2, say no. You should only be having 500 milligrams at a meal at one time, okay? So that is really important. Sometimes I find that patients just kind of take a bunch, get them all over with earlier in the day, or if you're having other competing foods, that can not absorb as well. The other thing is pairing that calcium and vitamin D, which you can definitely do in terms of foods as well. Alrighty here. So this is just kind of our clinical standards at Duke that we use in terms of vitamin and mineral deficiencies and kind of what we're going to be recommending. But like I said, is working with a professional that can help you determine where you're at. And maybe your levels are normal and you don't really need to worry about it, but just really focusing on that balanced diet is really what you can continue to strive for on a daily basis. Alrighty. So I wanted to switch here is, I'm someone, I've worked in transplant for quite a while, and so this is really my area of what I know and see on a day-to-day. So what I wanted to mention here is a lot of us can be at risk for malnutrition. And because of our energy needs are so high here, we want to make sure that we are trying to optimize as best as we can. So going back to, like I said, is eating every couple hours, eating every 3 to 4 hours, smaller meals, smaller snacks, prioritizing that protein throughout the day, like I said, from that balanced component we are going for, focus on that low sodium component I mentioned. And there's actually research that supports the eating a small snack of 200 calories, about 10 to 15 grams of protein prior to bed can be helpful from a liver standpoint. So malnutrition can be very difficult when you're feeling lousy. You don't feel like eating. You may not necessarily have the support at home to, get up and make meals. I've seen it all, quite literally. And so I completely understand that it can be difficult to try to kind of get out of that groove. But any step that you can kind of take in the right direction to, I always tell patients is what you do have control over is your nutrition. Despite your disease and despite what's going on, you have control over what you're putting into your body and how you're nourishing it on a day-to-day basis. So even just making one better choice than yesterday can be helpful in the long term. Well, just mention, if you're at this stage, it is very important, potentially maybe, considering transplant, and there will be a dietitian that you can talk with that will meet with you and go over all of these things and generally assess most things that I have mentioned here today. Oopsies. Alrighty, so like I said, biggest takeaway here is just one goal at a time. You do not have to do all of this tomorrow. You don't even have to do all this by next year. You can take it, but think about what can I actually do this week? And you have to be patient with yourself. We're not expected. We're not people who like change. No humans like change. We get that. But it's the biggest thing is how to work with someone to get that change realistically on a day-to-day. Alrighty, so I thank you guys for your time, and I open the floor to any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you, Megan. And I get the honor of asking a lot of the questions. So again, if there's any others, feel free to raise your hand and the team will bring them up. But first off, sodium daily intake, 1,000 or 1,500?
So that's going to depend on your clinical picture. I generally do not recommend less than 1,000. Your body needs some amount of sodium. So a general, across the board, what we consider a healthy amount of sodium would be 2,000 or less. But, if you have, for example, edema in your legs or your belly, you're having fluid, I'd say for 1,500 is a realistic good number to stick to. So kind of varies on your clinical state, but 1,500 to 2,000 to answer your question.
Awesome. And what about water versus sparkling water for hydration? That's
a good question. So, I understand a lot of my patients really love sparkling water.
Who doesn't?
So really just, you got to think about what is in it. When you go to the store, those labels are not clear. So I generally recommend if it is just water that has carbonation added to it, I'd say that's a good choice. So brands you may think of in the store, maybe like LaCroix, maybe Pellegrino, maybe Bubbly, things of that nature. Now there's plenty of others, but I'm just naming some top couple. Then there can be other products where they will add an artificial sweetener into those. So those are not ones that I'm generally encouraging as much. We get very attenuated to sugar. And I have patients who just drink, I'm trying to think of a brand. I know like the Walmart Clear American brand, those have artificial sweeteners in them. A lot of different brands do. I know Pellegrino makes a version of theirs that has the sugar in them. So you really just have to be cognizant of if it really just says water and carbonation, or does it have other aspartame or like there could be other sweeteners after it. So you can drink either if it is water or carbonated water. Both are just fine.
Great. That was a good segue as well. The next question is about artificial sweeteners, kind of comparing sugar to, Splenda or Truvia, or there's the monk fruit one now.
Yeah.
What about those to give a little sweetness?
Up and coming research, right? Everyone loves this. I mean, generally across the board, when we think about sugar, one of the points that I said is less is better, right? So we have so much. Like I said, even bread has sugar added to that. I don't know if anyone knew. Despite your sweets, despite your, sauces and things, we already have so much sugar in our foods itself. The more that we can decrease the sugar altogether, the better. I will say is, again, just like I said with that coffee example, weaning yourself down, that's going to be the best thing for you long term. Because we start to crave this sugar, right? And then we feel those crashes, and everyone knows how that goes. It's ups and downs all day long. But if you have other underlying conditions, I would recommend one type over another. Generally, the plant-based sugars would be a good option. The calorie-free, again, we're thinking about maintaining that healthy weight or trying to achieve that healthier weight for us. So again, it kind of depends on your clinical picture, but I would say really, the other thing to think about too is these artificial sweeteners are significantly sweeter than table sugar, right? So if you took a teaspoon of one and a teaspoon of the other, the artificial sweeteners, no matter what it is going to be sweeter across the board. So if you're using that same amount that you had put in your coffee before, you start to then get very used to that sweetness level. And again, your body starts to crave it. So unfortunately, there's not really a black and white answer there. But if you had an underlying condition of diabetes, for example, I would say yes, then an artificial sweetener would be a better choice. But generally, the more we can kind of cut back, and that's just really across the board, the better.
Okay. So now one question on cruciferous vegetables like broccoli being good for your liver. True, not true?
So broccoli's not bad. But in terms of, it's not going to be better than necessarily a green pepper.
Okay.
Or compare it to those Brussels sprouts or those asparagus that are in the fridge. there's no research that's necessarily indicating that one is necessarily better for the other. But yes, I have heard that, patients will come to me and say, I stopped eating that because I heard it's not good for the liver. Based on what? What are we basing that off of? Unfortunately, there's no studies that are really indicating, really besides coffee, that we can say is really going to be helping with that inflammation that we're seeing in that liver.
Okay. We have a question on zinc and copper, being beneficial with PBC. Thoughts?
Yeah, so that's another one that if there can be medications that can be contributing to that as well. So if you feel like you're at risk for zinc and copper deficiency, also there are other liver-related diseases that we can see zinc and copper deficiencies as well. The biggest thing is if you're having symptoms of low levels or high levels of things, it's really just assessing with your physician.
Okay. Yeah, it's best always to talk with your physician. Because there's another question then here about calcium, vitamin D, and taking ursodeoxycholic acid, kind of those together. Do you have thoughts on that?
What exactly is the question, sorry?
For calcium and vitamin D, if
Yeah.
you're taking urso, should you increase or?
Yeah, so in terms of, you asking about timing or just increasing the total doses of the vitamin D? Timing.
We were always told to take them at separate times.
Yeah.
Or I was always told to take them at separate times.
Yeah. I would continue to do that, yes. But I mean, I wouldn't do anything different than just separate them. But I mean, it also depends on if there's other medications that are involved that may necessarily need you to separate as well. So I would say keep them separate, but it's always, like, everyone in here is on all different meds, so I can't really say across the board, but yes, for urso,
Yes.
absolutely take it separate.
Good. Yeah, and I think probably a good comment, like always to talk it through with your doctor
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, like, you know,
or your nutritionist.
yeah, from a nutrition standpoint, it's hard because everyone, again, once I know a chart, I could probably tell you a little bit more. I'm on the clinical side, but it's very individual.
Yep. And protein levels, general range as far as how much protein per day?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for just general PBC, I would say it's your body weight, your ideal body weight, about 1 to 1.3 kilos or grams per kilo. And then if you're at a more advanced stage of liver disease, then it's going to be a bit higher. So we're going to see more like 1.3 to 1.5.
Great.
But again, if your doctor can tell you can say, hey, the dietitian said that, what does that mean? And then you can take that information and go to these tracking apps and say, how much am I getting and how much am I not getting? And then kind of compensate for that difference there.
Awesome. Great. I think that's everything. Thank you for your time, Megan.
right, thank you.
Appreciate it.